For our group project, we are going to be talking about the endoscope. On this next slide, we will first begin by talking about what an endoscope is. So essentially, an endoscope is like a bendy telescope. Instead of the rigid tube used in a telescope, we have a more flexible, bendy tube to help the physician navigate the body. And this is made up of 3 main optical cables, 2 of which will go down into the body, and the third will reflect the image back up to the physician, which can either have an eyepiece or a camera monitor. And on this next slide, we will see the distal end, which has the flexible tube, which is usually made of glass or plastic. And then on the proximal end, you have the eyepiece or the camera mount.
Yeah, so just like Chloe said about the telescope or the optical fiber being similar to the telescope, like she pointed out at the distal end, we have the objective lens, which links to one of the more bendy cables, and it relays information in the form of light back to the eyepiece lens or to a monitor or CCD. So that way we can view what's going on down into the body. And then the typical lenses and cables are about 0.5 centimeters in diameter. So here we have the anatomy of the optical fiber. We have the core, which carries the light, and that's either a glass or a plastic. And then we have the cladding, which protects the core and stops the light from escaping, which is just your silica. And then we have a coating, which protects the fiber from damage like moisture. It's usually an acrylic fiber coating. So that's your anatomy. And then, so optical fibers are narrow tubes of glass fibers with the plastic coating, and the light bounces off the walls of the fiber and can even bounce around the corners due to total internal reflection. And on the next slide, we said that total internal reflection is a complete reflection of a ray of light within a medium from the surrounding surfaces back into the medium. And we can do calculations with this via Snell's law.
So Snell's law for this problem, we'll be using theta 2 as 90 degrees because that's the definition of total internal reflection, as Ali mentioned. We'll be solving for the critical angle, which is the angle of incidence here that allows the reflected ray to be totally internally reflected. And the indices of refraction that we'll be using are for polycarbonate and glass for N1, as Ali mentioned that it's the core, and silica for N2 because it's the cladding. So our first calculation is on total internal reflection. And here is our total internal reflection critical angle for polycarbonate. And here is our total internal reflection critical angle for glass, as N2 is the same here because both of the cladding is silica.
And so in addition to total internal reflection, there is also a lens system with the endoscope that allows it to function as an optical instrument. And so we have discussed before that it is similar to a telescope in some ways, however, it's not exactly like a telescope. And so light is going to be carried into the patient, and then it is going to reflect off an object. This is typically going to be an organ or vasculature or just any structure in question. And it's going to enter the distal or the patient end of the fiber. The objective lens at this end of the fiber is going to focus a real image of the object viewed into this distal fiber bundle, and then this bundle of optical cables is going to transmit the image to the proximal end face. So this is now the face that the surgeon is viewing through. There's another eyepiece at the proximal end face, and this is going to form a magnified virtual image, so slightly different from telescopes. And this magnified virtual image is going to be at approximately 25 centimeters in front of the normal eye, which is interesting because that's also the near point of a normal human eye. The overall magnification of an endoscope we can calculate by taking the product of the magnification of the objective lens and the eyepiece. And so this is an instance where it differs from telescopes because the overall magnification like this in this instance is similar to microscopes. And the magnification of the objective lens is typically less than 1, and it is inversely proportional to the distance between the object and the lens. And so what this means is that we can only give an exact magnification for an endoscope if we know the object distance. And the endoscope lenses are constantly being adjusted depending on the situation. And so these are some really cool ray diagrams that we found online looking at explaining the optical instrument that is the endoscope. And so you can see on the top ray diagram, this is the situation that I was describing, where we have light that's reflecting off an object. It is being refracted by the objective lens into that square that is the distal bundle of these fiber optic cables. And then it's going to be transmitted back to the eyepiece, where the image is just the same exact way as it was from the distal end. And then the eyepiece is going to create that magnified virtual image that we see as a final image approximately 25 centimeters away from the eye.
So personally, I'm a biology major and I'm pre-med, and a specialty that really interests me is orthopedics. So I did an internship with an orthopedic surgeon, and one of the most common surgeries that he did was arthroscopies in order to repair torn rotator cuffs. And so it's very similar to like we've described. The whole procedure we viewed from a screen via the scope. That had a camera at the end of it, which used the optical fibers to shine light inside of the body, and then use the systems that way we could view it on the screen. And it's just a really cool process that allows a procedure, someone to fix a torn rotator cuff that would have been really more invasive surgery otherwise.
And so I'm also pre-med as well, and I specifically want to go into pediatric general surgery. And so in general surgery, endoscopes are actually really, really popular because traditionally, before endoscopes were used, anytime you wanted to see something inside the body, you pretty much had to cut open a patient to visualize whatever structure you were looking at as best as possible. But with endoscopes now, these procedures have now become minimally invasive, and you only need a tiny little incision to fit an endoscope through, and you can visualize anything you want. And so specifically, there's a really cool procedure called a gastroscopy, or if you want to use the fun name, it is an esophago-gastroduodenoscopy, where an endoscope is inserted into a patient's mouth, and you can truly visualize anything from their pharynx and esophagus all the way down to their duodenum. So that's the opening between the stomach and the small intestine. So it's a super duper long endoscope. And you can screen for cancers, you can find images or objects that are stuck in there that have been swallowed, and then you can remove them. So it's a really fantastic visual tool in the field of surgery.
I'm also pre-med, and I'm really interested in obstetrics and gynecology. So a really great application for the endoscope there is laparoscopic procedures. You commonly see them in removals of ovarian cysts or fetal surgeries so that the baby can develop normally. And even more surgeries that have to do with in utero situations.
So I'm a pre-physical therapy student, and without all of these endoscopic surgeries, my future job as a physical therapist would be made so much more difficult because a lot of surgeries are not possible without the endoscope, which would cause physical therapists to have to do total repair just in therapy, not surgery. So one last application of the endoscope is a keyhole surgery, which is actually really cool because instead of reflecting light down the endoscope, it reflects a laser, very high intensity lasers, which can be used to cut or destroy tissue. So the beam is extremely narrow and is extremely precise, and it also produces heat to cauterize the tissue. So in the next slide, we have one more application in a practice problem, and we used the wavelength of most lasers used in the surgery to calculate the energy of a photon in millielectron volts. And last, we have our references. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.